I think that if you are here in this room with us, you know that it does. The reason that we're here today and the question that we're hoping to answer is whether or not Tampa Bay's organizations are actually prepared to face the threat landscape that we are facing. So before we dive in, I'm just going to briefly introduce the wonderful panelists that I have up here with me today. First up, next to me, I have Joyce Francani. Is a founder and CISO of unpack Cyber, as well as the Chief Technology Security Officer at Qualys. Joyce is a cybersecurity executive and CISO with experience across defense, healthcare, and retail cybersecurity, which are sectors with completely different threat models, regulatory environments, and consequence levels. Joyce, thank you for being here. Next to Joyce, I have Ernie Ferraresso, who is the Senior Director of Cyber Florida at the University of South Florida. Ernie is a retired U.S. Marines intelligence officer with a vast experience in intelligence and cybersecurity. In his role at Cyber Florida, he helps strengthen cybersecurity efforts across the state and unites government, academia, and private cybersecurity sectors. Thank you, Ernie, for being here. Next up, we have Michael Brooks, who is the Director of CMMC Strategy and Engagement at Align. And Michael has a deep experience guiding organizations through certification readiness. And on the end, I have Larry Trotter, who is the founder and CEO of Inherent Security. Larry supports healthcare technology and growth stage companies navigating complex security and compliance challenges. He has very strong views on what it means when critical infrastructure can't fund its own cybersecurity. Thank you for being here. And I'm Serena Gandy. I am the Senior Communications and Marketing Analyst at Cyber Florida. I've been working in the cybersecurity communications world in Tampa Bay for the last 7 years. I'm very happy to be here with all of you today. So today we're going to explore what it really means to go beyond the firewall, and not just from a technology standpoint, but from the perspective of people, process, and the ecosystem. So I'm going to start today's discussion with a statistic from the inaugural Cyber survey. The survey found that 80% of organizations say that current security solutions are too expensive, and 74% believe that existing education is failing to prepare the next generation. So just a quick show of hands really quick. How many of you here today have experienced some kind of security incident in your organizations in the last couple of years? It's a good amount of hands, yeah. And can you raise your hands again if you found out about those incidents in real time, like as they were happening? And how about after the fact? So about half and half. So Ernie, my very first question of today is directed to you. Seeing these hands raised out here, what do these numbers kind of represent for you?
Well, first, thanks for the question, and thanks for having me here. So it's interesting when you talk about the findings of the survey, and then we just look around here. The thing I think that is really interesting about this is I have to believe that even though folks at within their organization, they may not be aware of a cyber incident that at their organization. Statistically speaking, their organization has been either directly or indirectly impacted, whether it's their entity themselves or one of their clients or supply chain organizations that have affected that. So, and I think that's part of the story to be told, is that this is now everybody's business, and it's important that everybody take a part in it. When we look at the finding that things are too expensive, or that the workforce, people aren't being prepared, part of the challenge is it's not so much that these tools are expensive, but it's that we are in this part of this area where I think we're arguably not moving fast enough, where I'll say cyber and cybersecurity is becoming more understood, that it involves every part of the organization. So I think when we talk about the workforce and resource allocations and demand signals and all that, and particularly even cyber strategy within an organization, the key thing and that we're getting towards now is educating and making senior leaders across any organization, any sector, aware of how their entities are dependent on cyber and cyber-enabled systems. I mean, you mentioned healthcare, right? How you getting healthcare executives to understand this? Well, cyber, it's not that important until their patient management system, which is this is not administering medication. This isn't performing surgery. This is the, for lack of a term, the back office suite that allows them to track patients goes down because of a cyber incident. and that hospital can no longer treat and admit patients. So now they stop being a hospital. And so this, quote, little IT problem now is an existential problem, not just for that hospital, but now all of a sudden, that hospital can't treat patients, can't admit patients. But that doesn't mean people aren't still coming to the hospital. And so now all of a sudden, all the other hospitals in the area have to be worried about an uptick in patients. Or the same type of thing is, well, we don't have to worry about cyber as a hospital. I don't have to think about that. I don't have to think about my suppliers. Except when your single contracted blood supplier has a cyber incident not related to the management of their blood, but to their payment system, which shuts down their blood supply ability for weeks. Now all of a sudden, oh yeah, by the way, you've negotiated a single source contract with that entity that even though they can't provide it, you still can't go anywhere else. Now you're a hospital that can't get blood because one of your suppliers has had a cyber incident. So long story short, that's about changing the mindset of leadership and management to understand that most, if not all organizations, their critical functions that make them able to do what they do have some sort of, are cyber enabled or rely on cyber. And that changes the mindset that you got to think about not just your ambulances, your doctors, your trucks, your buildings, but what's your key, when it's 10 o'clock at night, you know where your data is.
Very well said. This has changed over the last couple of decades, and we really are all in it together. It's everybody's problem. And security models are changing drastically. The old model of security was focused on building a wall and kind of keeping the threats outside. That kind of mentality has died a little. And the new model is zero trust, where you assume breach and you verify everything. So Joyce, you have built zero trust programs at scale inside some of the largest organizations in America. Can you tell me what is the most common place that organizations get stuck or fail when it comes to implementing zero trust?
Thank you for having me. So zero trust, right? So in security, before the model was trust but verify. With zero trust, it's verify and then trust, right? And so it's shifting the model from implicit trust to validate everything and then trust, right? And what I mean by that is validate your identity, your devices, your applications, your data. Validate everything before you give access to anything or anyone, right? And so that encompasses making sure that companies understand their asset models, third-party vendors, their service providers, right? Where I see, in all of my experience in building zero trust programs, zero trust failing at scale is two things, right? The ownership gap and organizational cultural changes. And so I'm going to pick on the ownership gap. And so it's rare, and Mike and I were at CVS together, it's rare that organizations have full comprehensive visibility of all of their assets. And so what I mean all of their assets is your applications, your workstations, your servers, your VMs, your containers, everything in the cloud. It's very, very difficult in order to manage those. And then at a granular level, your APIs, your service accounts, all of your interconnections. Like when you think about that, all of those are endpoints. They must all be secured. They must all have strong authentication models, right? And so having that ownership gap, and that's why I said the first one is ownership gap, is having that complete comprehensive visibility in order for you to successfully enable zero trust. You must understand who's on your network, who's trying to access your network, who's that third-party vendor that requires access, their SaaS applications. And so that's one of the biggest reasons why it's difficult. And one more thing. So then with zero trust, it's 20% technology and 80% organization and cultural changes. So that's why it's really important for that organizational to be supported by executive leadership.
Larry, my next question is for you. So as Ernie and Joyce have mentioned, you work primarily with healthcare technology companies where the stakes are incredibly high. HIPAA has existed since 1996. Why are health tech companies still getting this wrong in 2026, and who is the one paying the price when they do?
So I love this question because I really want to frame it. It really starts from the top. It's a trickle-down effect, and it starts with HIPAA, HHS, Health and Human Services, and the Office of Civil Rights. They're the ones who essentially manage the law and also enforcement. So the big problem is enforcement. OCR comes in and does an audit if someone gets breached, but they don't have the resources to do that. Penalties go along with that. they're just not high enough. So it's uncomfortable. The truth is, a health system would say, or you'd rather take the risk versus trying to spend the money on cybersecurity and actually do the right thing. So that's a problem in itself. So, how does this flow to the actual health system? So the health system adopts a health tech product, and they must require that product to be HIPAA compliant. When they go through the security procurement process, they take a lot of what the health tech company says at face value. The due diligence really isn't there. Although I will give them credit, it has gotten better over the last few years because, as Ernie mentioned, when it comes to the supply chain ecosystem, they have been responsible for breaches in the top 3 within the last 2 or 3 years and rising, especially in healthcare. Specifically in 2024, 42% of the breaches were due to the supply chain in healthcare. That doesn't say anything in itself. So where does health tech come in? At the end of the day, they really want to close the deal. And to close the deal, serve a solution, they must be HIPAA compliant. So what do? They treat it as a checkbox, not as a core value to their business. So, are we doing security awareness change? Check. Do we have access controls? Check. Encryption? Check. So when it's treated like that, it's not going to be as robust as it needs to be to stay safe. And at the end of the day, who we are hurting is the patient.
You mentioned, HIPAA, and it's still viewed as a compliance risk, right? What are we going to do? It's cheaper for us to take the hit and pay the fine than it is to do the system, right? Now, you can do that if it's just a data breach, if you're just going to do that. But if it's the data breach that takes your patient management system offline, that means you no longer can treat patients, that's a much different problem set. And it's getting people to think that way, that it's not, that this is this is a serious business risk, not a compliance risk. And changing that mindset, and people thinking differently about how this works.
I wanted to add one thing about changing the mind. It definitely makes a lot of sense in terms of healthcare. I don't know if everybody knows, last year there was actually an incident where a patient died because of a cybersecurity attack. So it's happening now, and someone might say, oh, well, that's a one-off. But it really isn't, because it was due to ransomware. I would say 98% of the breaches that you hear about across industry in general, but healthcare. So it is definitely, changing that mindset. And also geopolitical tensions. 2 weeks ago, a medical supplier, Stryker, was breached, and it was from an Iranian group, and they didn't want anything, but they said it was just, because we're at war. So organizations need to take into consideration.
Michael, I'm about to dig very deep into your brain in our next section, but first I want to hear, do you have any thoughts on this and where you're currently seeing organizations get this right or where they're getting it wrong?
Yeah, I do. Thank you for having me. Thanks to everybody. Really appreciate it. My first thing I would like to do is really just ask a question of the audience, just something to think about. Why didn't the IT team set up the remote office at the beach? It was too cloudy.
It's very nice.
Okay, cyber human, you got to bring it. I mean, like Ernie, I'm a retired Air Force cyber operations officer, right? That's what I did in the military. The military is very simplistic. It's push button, get cookie. It's got to be that simple. And so, that's the lens that I view things through, is really, when we talk about cybersecurity, it's security. We just put cyber in front of it and we lose our minds. We forget how to protect and defend things. You know how to protect your home. You probably have a Ring camera on the front door. Every time the door opens, you get a notice. You've got a lock on your garage door. You've got a PIN code. You probably have a lock on your gate on the backside. But when we get into computers and data and systems, all of a sudden we lose the ability to protect things and think about things holistically. And so I think for me that it comes down to strategy. Joyce was talking about zero trust. Zero trust isn't a mystical, magical thing. It's not a technical solution. It's a strategy. It's an implementation strategy of how you apply tools and technologies and process to secure things. This is why we have compliance regulations.